Yanique. We have Francine.
Hello, everybody. Welcome again. The Middle is a love story about flying and in 21st century. It seems like fate, even though they are from very different backgrounds. But are they meant to be? The novel moves from continental United States to the Virgin Islands to Ghana to show how one couple's romance is influenced by the family lore and love stories that preceded their own pairing. Exploring desire and identity, religion and class, passion and obligation, the novel posits that in order to answer the question, who are we meant to be with, we must first understand who we are and how we came to be. Tiphane Yanique is originally from the U.S. Virgin Islands and is also the author of the novel Land of Love and Drowning, the story collection How to Escape from a Leper Colony, and the poetry collection Wife. She has received a Fulbright scholarship and has been named a National Book Foundation 5 Under 35 honoree. She now teaches at Emory University.
All right. Thank you very much, Francine. And for the viewers who have been following us from the beginning, they might recognize that this is the second time we're reviewing this book because we did it in January 2022. And so there might be some familiarity. But to throw it out to the panel now, I have to ask, are there things that you noticed on your second reading of Monster in the Middle that you hadn't noticed on your first reading? Who wants to begin?
I can begin here with the two things that stand out to me in the second reading. Number one is I have a greater awareness of Unique's focus on identity, racial, ethnic identity, especially that didn't I just don't remember from last year's reading. A second thing is the chapter on Stella's father or stepfather, how pivotal that chapter is in understanding the entirety of the book in terms of, I would say, the explanation of monsters and being in the middle. It seemed like what he said when I read last year, I must have been in a rush. I don't know. I read it more carefully this time, and I really understood where the whole framework uh, is situated for the book.
Paula?
Oh, what I noticed was very mundane. I noticed that Stella's indiscretion during her marriage was not limited to the um, the encounters with Malika. But I hadn't, for some reason, I just didn't notice that on the first reading.
Wow, I don't think I noticed that at all, either reading. Can you expand a little bit on that?
Well,
The
there was a custodian. There were two other people. I can't remember exact. Oh, someone.
Student.
I think the vice principal of her school. He, and there was a third person. I
Um,
remember she had a flirtation with a student from
right.
Jamaica.
Yes,
But
I
mm,
no,
remember that.
but there was some another person. I don't remember who that person is now. So
Hmm, interesting. For
go
me
ahead.
personally, I more attention to all the references to the labyrinth, which I think played a really big part of the book, and just how that kind of appeared throughout the book. This idea of the labyrinth and mazes and that kind of stuff. I really picked up on that a lot more on this reading, and the references to Greek mythology and the Minotaur. Those really jumped out at me a lot more this time around.
Tony?
I agree with Eric with that chapter. That's certainly something that stood out with Stella's call him his stepdad, her stepdad, or um, that explained a lot more to me. And I believe you're going to pop a question later on about the monster, and I think within that chapter gives me a clue to the answer. Um, that was more revealing. And only one other thing, um, I had a a softer embrace of Fly in this second time around. He was more endearing to me this time around than the first. Somehow the first, I didn't think he was as grounded. Not that I'm saying he's really grounded, but I saw more substance in Fly this time around than the first reading.
And well, the first time I read it, I did the ebook, and this time in preparation for this airing of our reflections, I did the audiobook, and it was quite nice hearing the different voices in the narration, and you also got the Virgin Islands accent. I think when they were reading Stella's part. Um, but one thing that stood out for me in the audiobook was that the the, the voices that they gave to the preachers. I don't want to get into too many details, but it was hilarious. But it also seemed like there was a bit of mockery. There was an element of mockery in the voices that described to the preachers. So that I didn't pick up on the first in my own voice, but here it I started to think, maybe there's a deeper message in the novel about preachers and religion and Christianity in particular. So that's the only thing that really stood out to me on the second time.
I similarly read it.
Yes,
I read the paperback version last year, but this time I listened to the audio, and I was really pleasantly surprised by how the accents, the different number of people narrating it, and I think Tiphane Yanique is one of the narrators. I think she voices Stella, but I don't actually know that for a fact. But they have that's what the accent is. And I really like that as well. That I thought it brought it to life in a very different way, and it's always an easier read because of all these different voices that you have in the paper. When you just reading the text, you can really hear the difference really clearly in the audiobook. I think it's really, really well done, actually.
I agree. The audiobook was really well done. But to move on a bit, another question that I have to throw out there is, does this novel remind you of any of the other novels that we've read?
For me, this one, Sky Day, what I noticed this time was the similarity of the relationship between Stella and Stephen, her starter husband, reminded me of the relationship between Tan and what was her name, the healer in This One Sky Day. What was her name again?
Anise?
Anise. Yes,
Anise,
I think it was Anise. I think so. Stephen felt that it was kind of like a paternalistic approach, and that was the kind of thing that even though Tan I think was a nicer guy than Stephen, but then in the narrator in this novel says Stephen is a nice guy. All the worst ones are, which I thought, and maybe I guess the narrator in this One Sky Day had a similar view of Tan because I loved Tan, but it was very clear to me that the narrator didn't.
I got a sense of Island of Forgetting in some parts, maybe because of the family trauma. Some of the characters were sort of similar in terms of story. So if I am to compare it, or if I'm to say what it reminds me of, that's the one I would choose that we've discussed. I got a sort of feeling of Island of Forgetting in certain parts. And I don't know, because you're writing about the Caribbean, right? So you're going to write about beach and white sand and so on. So that goes without saying. But in terms of character development, there were some similarities I found.
There's also the key difference with Island of Forgetting, where her first love, but not her first sexual experience, the main character, is with a white man, right? So who's kind of foreign but local. So there is I think Island of Forgetting is definitely one that I would draw upon. I might say particularly as well, perhaps because it's always on my mind, but how the one on Sister Sweeps Her House, this kind of idea of the family trauma and like each generation having to deal with the trauma of the last. But that is also in Island of Forgetting. Maybe the Bajans have a thing about family trauma. But those are the ones that jump out as me as well.
I mean, for me, I had immediate flashbacks to Clap When You Land, and for the main reason that it just sort of followed the journey of young people and coming of age in America, and it gave me ideas of that, not specifically in terms of themes, because Clap When You Land focuses on something quite different, but in terms of the journey of young people in America, America being the way it is, of course, that was sort of reminiscent for me. And strangely enough, I also got flashbacks to What a Mother's Love Don't Teach You in terms of Apollo. While Apollo grew up rich and had the family comforts, he also had a sort of, if you could call it, black consciousness, and knew in some instances of or was exposed to some of the instances of racism in America. So that sort of gave me a little leeway to compare Apollo with Fly and the way they grew up in America, comparing Fly's sort of strange upbringing to Apollo's, sheltered and shielded upbringing.
Can I jump in here with this one? I That was a hard question for me because it really didn't remind me of anything that I read previously. But in hearing these comments, I can see definitely some similarities between this book and I'm Forgetting. But to your point, RJ, about what's the book you just mentioned?
What a Mother's Love Don't Teach You.
Yeah, and Apollo. I see comparisons between him and Stephen Jones, um, because I think they grew up with a similar family background, different characters, definitely, but similar. And one thing that I omitted to say earlier was that I paid more attention to Stephen Jones this time than I did the first reading, and for some reason, I thought Stephen Jones was biracial my first reading, but no, I knew he was adopted. I thought he was biracial, but no, this second reading, the brother's black, but he's a different type of black.
Did this give you any sort of tinges of the book you did, Elizabeth Nunez's Now Lila Knows, in terms of the on a university campus, etc.?
A little bit, a little bit,
No,
not much.
no, Lila knows. It did remind me of that, because this novel certainly is very. It wants to point out that black people are not a monolith. We come from all kinds of backgrounds, all kinds of class backgrounds, all kinds of nationalities. I think Tiphane Yanique wanted to make that point, and as stridently as Elizabeth Nunez made that point in No Lila Knows.
I completely agree there, Paula. Yeah.
And also that clash as well, right? That arrival of a Caribbean woman into an African American context, right? That's one of the kind of big things in both of those novels. Which also, I might say something slightly what's the word, heretical, but it's strong reminder there of also Americana by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. Like I know we haven't discussed it as a group. Sorry.
You stole my thunder. That just went in my head when you mentioned about the Caribbean woman in African American context, but in Americana, it's an African woman in an African American context, and the main character's relationship with the Yale professor. Yeah, that does remind me of that. Stella's relationship with Stephen Jones. Haha, good call there, Keswa.
Yeah, I
did
think it
anyone
was even commented upon that she commented upon the fact that even though Stephen was black, that he wasn't, like, I think she literally had more in common with Joanne, who was white, than with Stephen, because Joanne was white, but he was from the Caribbean, you know? So yeah, that was an interesting play there.
But even that, I think Stella was just, oh, I call it naivete, or just I think she misread Johan. I think Mermaid did too, calling him an African boy and that sort of thing. He was African. This is something that came out better for me in this reading, is that Johan was white, and he was able to go to the States, be at Virginia Tech. Yes, he had that traumatizing situation with the shooting there. But when he moved to Denver or Colorado, wherever he was, uh, that's when he came into his whiteness. In fact, it's stated in the text that when he went to Virginia Tech, he basically melted in, he mixed in, he felt more comfortable. That's something that I missed in the first reading. So I think we're getting this perception of Stephen from Maristella's viewpoint, but I think Maristella's viewpoint was a false reading of Johann.
I completely agree, but that isn't something I picked up on the second reading. That's something I noticed on the first reading, that Johann was white, and he was going to always be white. And he was actually in some ways a lot like Ellie right at the beginning, right? Because both of them have these characters who have this kind of links. Because I think isn't Ellie, she's born in Africa, or she's conceived in Africa.
That Ellie.
So yeah, the very first Ellie.
Eloise, that Ellie. Mm-hmm.
Yes, Eloise. Sorry, right. And they're both these kind of white characters who have some kind of connection that makes the black people around them feel that they're not like the other white people, but actually they're as white as anybody else. And I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because especially with Maristella and Johann, like I remember from the first thing, like this man is gonna leave you when he goes to the US. He's gonna realize he's white, and he is not gonna look back, because he can.
Yeah, but Johann didn't leave her.
No,
she left him.
She's the one
she left him.
She left him, but when she got to one of the half of the journey is because she knows to be with him, she can't be her full self, right? That's the whole reason why she goes to Ghana. When she goes to his house, and it's like the Caribbean never existed with his music collection. Like he won't leave her, but he's also going to make huge demands of who she can be to be with him. And that is a form of leaving her.
I'm not sure.
A form of leaving, because the Caribbeanness that they share, even in the Caribbean as well, he introduces her to things that she doesn't have access to. They live two different worlds within the same space. So his Caribbean is never her Caribbean. He is a white Caribbean person and lives with all of that privilege. And it doesn't prevent him from forming a genuine, serious bond with her. But it was never one that was going to test the reality of adulthood. Sorry, that was my cynical take.
But then how are in general are teenage romances supposed to test the adult, the stresses of adulthood? I think teenage romances are supposed to be relegated to your teenage years. You learn from them. I thought it was very interesting what Tiphane Yanique did with Johann, because I agree with all of you that he was a white boy. But at first, he did have some culture shock when he went to the United States. And what Tiphane Yanique shows us is that he could integrate into the United States because he was white. I think the novel is showing us how white privilege works. And of course, white privilege, any kind of privilege, is very attractive. So of course, Johann is going to embrace that. And he notices that he's white when he moves to the United States. But that sort of comfort level, I think the novel is showing us that kind of comfort level would never be available to Maristella. And I think the novel in many, many ways shows us, discusses or points out how white privilege works, and the fact that those kinds of privileges will never be available to a black person. Because we saw that with Fly's dad, with Gary and Eloise. Gary says to Eloise, well, you'll have to move, essentially, you'll have to become black. You'll have to move into my community. And Eloise responds and says, but you can let go of your blackness. And he says, no, that's not possible. So I think that's the point that Tiphane Yanique is making, that white privilege confers certain, privileges that just are not available to black people.
And if I may, I do agree that that was very much a thread or a theme in the book in terms of white-black relationship. And there's something that Kessel said about, even in the Caribbean, Johann, white privilege was evident, just as it was when he blended into the US. So I think Tiphane Yanique was showing that that common thread that is transported from the Caribbean to the US. And yes, you are right about the point of privilege and how that gives one the upper hand or can give one the upper hand in a relationship. Somebody's always aspiring to be the one that doesn't have the privilege, in this case, the white privilege, is aspiring to, well, to please the other one, to measure up to the other one. I think there's quite a bit of that going on.
But then in the case of Eloise and Gary, I think Tiffany Yanique wanted, well, she definitely made me angry with Eloise, because I even have it when I have it circled quite angrily. I said when Eloise said my parents had sex in Africa, in sort of trying to get back, if I could say it like that, get to the level
It's
of Gary.
patronizing.
Yeah,
It's
to make it seem like
patronizing.
I'm
And
part of you because
but
like, my
that's
parents had sex in
but
Africa.
that happens a lot of the times, Roger. A lot of the times white people think that if they've had some trivial black experience, that qualifies them to understand what black is, and that 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 came out is that, you know.
I think this is a good time to take the reading, especially now that we're talking about Eloise and Gary, or Gary, depending on how you pronounce it. So I think we'll take the reading from Tiffany Yanique, and when we get back, we'll have an even more riveting discussion. Stay tuned.
Good day. My name is Tiphane Yanique. I'm going to be reading from my novel, Monster in the Middle, which I am just so excited to be sharing with you today. I'm going to start from the very beginning. There are two opening sections to this novel. The first opening section is called Love Letter. Dear Loves, when you fall in love, you will be certain that it is something special about that other person. Isn't that what the songs on the radio make us think? Or maybe you will be smart enough to know that it's also something special about you, because that is what the therapists on TV get paid to help you understand. Am I right? You already know that you will bring baggage into this new love thing because it's modern times. And so you've heard the term baggage. But baggage is not the most of it, you know? We know. Because listen, sweet ones, you are not falling in love with that one person. Is that you're bringing it all. You're bringing us. It's like how them old timey folks used to say that when two people get married, it's two families coming together. Or another way to understand it is that when you meet your love, you meeting all the people who ever loved them or who were supposed to love them but didn't love them enough, or hell, didn't love them at all. You feel where this is going, my loves? Please pay attention, knuckleheads, because it's going regardless. Love your parents. Chapter 1. Oakland Gomorrah, the story of Fly's father. The light said motel, and there wasn't a bulb missing. Not that it would have mattered if it said hotel or moat, not in all that rain, not after all they had been through. The earthquake, the road, each other. They had avoided crossing the bay altogether. The Bay Bridge had collapsed, but they didn't know that for sure then. They drove south down into the righteous belly, the holy thighs. St. Mateo, St. Jose, St. Luis, St. Maria, St. Barbara, St. Clarita. All the good men and women giving their names to those sad cities. They stopped in the City of Angels. They took the 10 through San Bernardino, drove through Cathedral City just for the name, stopped outside Phoenix, where he dipped a wrench into the engine and made the car purr. A day later in Las Cruces, the Crosses, they held each other in the car while Soul to Soul streamed in through the car's CD player. They stayed on the 10. 10 became a holy number. They drove across Texas almost without stopping, but then they stopped in San Antonio. Drove that city until they found the Black people, slept on a grocer's floor, bags of rice, their pillows. Then they started back north. We got to avoid Louisiana, Gary said to her, and Mississippi. It had been a mission until Texas, a sacred thing, a quest. After San Antonio, the road was all Eloise dreamed. The long road unstopping. They were driving into hell, it felt like. It was getting closer to winter, and yet they were getting hotter. They abandoned the 10, took the I-35 to meet St. Marcos, avoided Dallas, followed an off-road just to sight some water called Palestine, then up and up into Arkansas. The sign to a city read hope. Eloise held on to that image. The next stop was supposed to be Charlotte. Then they would decide north to New York or south to Miami. Either way, just a boat ride to paradise. But then the rain.
Welcome back. Kesua, just before we took the reading, it looked like you had a point that was burning. Do you want to still make that point?
I don't know if it was burning, but it's reminded me of the old adage. What you were saying, Tony, about what you were saying, Tony, Mummy, of the adage. You know, everybody wants to be black until nobody wants to be, but no one wants to actually be black, right? It's that idea. We were talking about when white people are trying to connect in some ways via some random experience with blackness. But actually, like none of the white people we encountered in this novel, despite being close to an individual black person, wanted to actually live like black people are obliged to live as a consequence of the way that racism enacts on our lives.
So I want to take the discussion in a sort of different direction now. So at page 28, Eleonora says, and I'm quoting here, the character of the mother always has power. A mother is power. Was this a novel rooted in motherhood? And I guess we would like this bit. By extension, would you also consider this novel a feminist novel?
I don't think the novel is rooted in motherhood. I think it speaks about parenthood. It's not certainly not. I don't think mothers get more attention than fathers. Fathers are equally important. What I found interesting about the quote you mentioned at page 28 is that that is not where it ends. Eleonora speaks about mothers having power. And then she goes on to speak about this is different than a wife. A wife has no power. That I find interesting. So I was wondering if anybody else found that interesting and what your thoughts are about that.
Yeah, the powerful statement that made me pause reading it the second time. Yeah, mothers. Yeah, I mean, what mothers have a type of power over their children to help shape and mold their children, boys, girls alike. Um, so she is an authority figure. May not be so in a marriage, and especially in the context of her marriage with Gary. Even though it doesn't seem as though I mean Gary had his own issues. We know. Um, but for her, that her powerlessness, I felt that her marriage had to do with Gary's relationship, his past relationship with Eloise. That it seems like she could never just tell Gary, take that woman's picture off the mantelpiece. She said it tacitly. She acted that she was disturbed, but it never came down. And eventually I think that that's the thing that destroyed that whole marriage. Probably was doomed from the get-go.
But you know, Gary was authoritarian anyway, you know. I mean, as much as he was likable, I thought even when you saw the relationship between himself and Eloise, he was authoritarian. And what I found interesting about the Eleanora's pronouncement about whether a wife has power was that Eloise said quite the opposite. Eloise, at one point, Eloise says Gary and her had known each other, known in the biblical sense. therefore she was like a wife, and therefore she could tell him how to do things, or she had some kind of power. That statement was made. So I was wondering whether that was meant. I suspect it's tied to Eloise's white privilege, and I don't know. I'm just wildly guessing. But it was interesting to me that Eloise thought that being a wife conferred power, whereas Eleonora thought it did not.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. And now, as you mentioned that, I'm thinking about Eleanor's backstory, the relationship between her father and her mother. Ooh, her daddy was something else. I mean, horribly abusive. And the mama, um, she, it seems like she was complicit in that, and that she never checked her husband on those abuses. So I think her statement may come from what she saw in her own household.
The dynamic between, or the dynamic among um Eleonora, Gary, and Fly reminded me of the dynamic between Shweta, Hans, and I can't remember the son's name in Kevin Jared Hussein's book. Because
Krishna.
Krishna, yeah,
Mm.
Krishna, the whole the way there was always that tension in the family, and Kevin Jared Hussein even mentioned it in his novel. He said when boys are in happy times, I'm paraphrasing here, they stick to their father, they love their father, they go to their father, and when they're sick, they find their mothers. And then in this case now, you hear when Fly finds out about, I think it was the divorce, when he suddenly confronts his father in his father's study. That reminds me of when Krishna finally decided to go to the house, to the house where his father was staying. The dynamic was just so similar. I'm not sure if anyone else picked up on that, or they're just realizing it now.
I didn't notice it, but now that you mention it, it is very similar.
Yeah, and
There's
that
something of the
reminds. Oh, go ahead, Ketchua.
no, no, I was just gonna say the same thing. That yeah, now that you say it, like it's a very similar kind of coming of age moment where they see their father in a new light as well,
Mm.
right? And they see themselves in a new light as well in terms of what they're able to vocalize. They previously haven't. Yeah,
because
that's a
Fly,
very
because Fly was still very naive when he stole this picture and the porno, and he seemed to be having a good time, and then suddenly at one point, and I think he was past his teenage years, he basically asked himself, "What the hell am I doing?" So
Mm. Yeah, but so that when you say that, when times are good for a boy, he attached to his father. When he's sick, he goes to his mother. It reminds me of the the speech in Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, Uncle Uchendu, when Okonkwo and his family are banished and he has to go to his motherland, and Uchendu makes that statement saying, why do you to your motherland? And he makes that beautiful speech. And he says that, Neka, why do we name our children Neka? Mother is supreme. He said, when times are good, it's the father, but when times are bad, you go to your mother.
On the issue of whether it's a feminist novel, I do not believe that it is um, overtly feminist. I think it's the assumption. It's not. She's not making. This is not a political treatise, but she has feminist assumptions. So the basis of the novel is feminist. I don't believe that she was. Actually, she may have been, because she does when Stella experiences that trauma in Ghana. She points out how women um, how women don't take steps to protect themselves and how they protect their abusers. The whole narrative points that out, and I think she wants us to think about that, because certainly Stella is failed by the system when she goes and she complains to the vice chancellor, and his response is absolutely atrocious, and Stella kind of decides to take one for the team she makes a statement to the effect of she doesn't want to be like those white women who accuse black men of this kind of thing. And I don't want to, of course, I don't want to divulge what that is because I don't want to spoil it for readers. But I think Tiphane Yanique wanted certainly women readers and perhaps men readers too to think about how women are willing or perhaps it's we've been taught to take one for the team.
I don't know if I 100% agree with that, Paula. Which is not like me, obviously. I'm so consensual normally, but ironic in the context. But I do think actually in the immediate aftermath of her experience, the first person that she reaches out to and feels safe around is a woman. And at that point, I think she even says, or we kind of hear her thinking, doesn't matter that she's white, like she's a woman, and she'll help me and she'll understand. And I think there's something. I don't think that makes the novel a feminist novel, but I do think she's pointing to a sense of sisterhood that can override differences that in other circumstances that people connect, right? And it's not in her head because the other one does have something has used to help. She needs with no demands on her energy. What happened? Well, no, she doesn't say that. She just needs to be done in education, simply, and how it's supposed to happen. And I hope that is always people's experience, right? In those times. And I thought that was quite powerful that she depicted it in that way. That she has a thought, I need a woman, any woman will do, and any woman responds accordingly. And I thought that was quite powerful. That later on, other things happen that suggest that it doesn't, in that immediate help doesn't translate into justice in any way, shape, or form. But there's certainly that. And there's also the scene with the doctor later on, a few weeks later, where she says, "Me too." And I don't know if that was a genuine nod to the Me Too movement or if it's just in the language of the time that's what was appropriate. But I thought that was really interesting as well.
And slightly correction, that was a nurse who said that, and not the doctor. But Paula, I think I agree with you that the I wouldn't call it a feminist novel, definitely the feminist assumptions, and I want to twist it slightly, because we're talking about that particular scene in the novel, and I'm going to draw from Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie here when she says that we're all, if we believe in the equality of men and women, we're all feminists. So I think TBA, that character TBA, is acting in a feminist way. He saw what was going on. He warned Stella. Stella rebuffed him. Oh, it's my birthday, blah blah blah. But then afterward, the narrator states that Stella and TBA were together all the time. So I think he sensed that something happened and he was there. So we're talking about sisterhood just now, but there's also that brotherhood and sisterhood that also comes into play in that particular scene.
And I think that scene too, one of the points that scene I think wants to reinforce is that we must trust our instincts. Because Stella got into trouble because she did not trust her instincts. Her instincts were telling her, don't go in that direction. And she, I think, in a misguided attempt at being gracious, ignored her instincts. And then what happened?
100% agree with that, Paula. I had that same thought. Like, she knew in her spirit she shouldn't do it. It wasn't safe. TBA had said to her, don't go. And she went anyway. And she didn't want to go. And she knew, just a complete agreement with that.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's how I felt. And there was also that pull because she did have her exams to prepare for. And that was what Stella really thought she ought to have been doing as well. So there was that, that tension of doing what it turned out to be the right thing would have been, and going on. But that was some major deception as well that I felt. uncomfortable with, because I can't remember the name of the guy who actually pulled her to the house. What was his name again?
Eddie.
Eddie. Right. I felt that Eddie, leading up to that, made Stella sort of trust him, and so that was a major deception. So I'm not entirely blaming Stella for not going the way her instincts may have, because she was deceived. She was deceived.
I think what saddened me about that whole scene is that I've seen so many guys like that. So many, it really took me back to my fun undergraduate experiences, that weren't identical to Stella's at all, but like men like that, who, like you say, kind of have this kind of presentation, but actually are unbelievably cruel, really disappointing characters. And I like that she depicted that, because that is some people's experiences, and there are people like that. But she also doesn't let the character be broken by that experience, and that's kind of interesting as well.
All right. So before we run out of time, I actually have two questions that I really want to get in here. The first is this a novel about faith? Who wants to jump in on that one?
I think absolutely. We're speaking about Stella and that experience she had, and that experience robs her of her faith. I think that the novel speaks about faith in so many ways, and it speaks about the complexity of faith, and it shows us faith as a good thing, it shows us faith as a bad thing. Yeah, so yes, this is a novel about faith.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. Yeah. Faith, maybe belief. I was wrestling with that question. Definitely, like Gary. Um, he had faiths and beliefs. Almost somebody who was covering all his bases, but somebody, I think with Gary, he was genuinely interested. That was his interest, and that's filtered down to Fly as well. Um, and yes, Maristella, and her family, where she grew up, they always, and even when she was in the orphanage, they always went to mass on Sunday, went to the beach. That was the family tradition. Um, Even though, mermaid mermaid was mermaid, cussing in mass and everything. So uh yeah, I think, Paula, I think I agree with you, the complexity of faith, and I think that's what even people of faith fail to appreciate, that our faith, whatever it is, Christianity, Buddhism, Islam, that we are complex people, and our faiths are also complex, and we should, at least in my opinion, we should embrace that complexity.
Would you also say that it's about having faith in love? Like they all really like believed in love and wanted to be loved and were looking for love. That's one of the first things that jumped into my mind when I thought about faith. It's not just faith in the religious sense, but this, faith in human love, basically.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to jump off without what Francine said, and without spoiling the end of the book for anybody. But I think that was also a test of Stella's fate. What happened in the end, because she was trying to. I don't want to spoil it, but she was anticipating that the person she loved or was a partner may or may not have been present, and when she opened that door. So that to me was a test of faith, as you put it. And as I have the mic, I'd also get ahead of you, Kessel, and go back to the role of this John the Baptist man and Fly. Um, and I think he helped to define Fly, not just the way Fly became Fly, but I think he helped to define Fly and his journey of faith. Um, so that was also a significant chunk of the book, that summer holiday that Fly took with his grandfather, and his cousin.
I actually wasn't going to bring him up. I was going to go back to what Eric was saying about belief as well being kind of a part of it as well as faith. I do think it's absolutely a novel about faith and does really interesting things with that concept and the way we understand it. But I also think it's definitely about the things we believe about ourselves and about other people. And that belief is also a central theme of the novel, and how powerful those beliefs are, the things that we believe we should or shouldn't do. One of the things that she regrets instantly, Maricela, is, or Stella, sorry, is that her and Johan had withheld something really precious that had been ruined, and they were foolish to ever have thought that they shouldn't have shared that together. And I think that, I think that's part of her kind of speaking on the things we believe, as well as faith in the kind of spiritual sense, religious sense.
And to go completely on a tangent, Roger, if you'd permit me, as we're talking about faith and you haven't brought up the monster,
I was literally about to ask that as the final question for us to wrap up.
Yeah,
We need to address the elephant or the monster in the room.
Yeah, and it's this whole question of faith in what you believe in others, what you believe in faith itself and the unknown. Is that the whole thing that was fighting this metaphorical monster? Is that what gave the characters in this book, like Stella's dad, on that journey to the army? Because to me, that's where the monster was defined. That's a demon, something that he had to overcome, and overcoming that had to do with faith, believing in a better tomorrow. I don't know if I'm too abstract in what I'm saying. Sorry, viewers, but
well, the thing is, we're out of time now, so I think we could do something. I think this is the first time we're doing it. For the viewers, we want you to read the book and tell us what you think the monster in the middle is. What is the monster in this story? I think that would be a good challenge to throw out because we're out of time. But this is not the end of our discussion on the book, because we're having an interview with the author. We really find out more about the book. We could ask more questions. We could probably even find out what the monster is. So once again, to our viewers, thank you for joining us here at Page Turners Plus. Do have a lovely day.
Where do you see yourself in 6 months? How about a career working in a medical laboratory, performing blood and specimen testing, or caring for seniors in home? Or laboratory assistant technician, certified advanced health aide, emergency medical responder, all in recognized based online and classroom sessions. Clinical attachments provides a unique stony grounds. Email